How's it going, everyone? Sean here from Raw Technique Studios. This is the answer video for the cues for Raw Technique Studios that I put up last week. So just going to go through all of your guys' questions and see what I could answer. So let's go ahead and start at the very bottom, the very first question. And let's see, how to mix your beat for maximum loudness. So I'll answer the first part and then I'll go through. So maximum loudness without clipping. What I do is on my limiter, no matter what your mixing or your mastering chain is, the maximum loudness and the not clipping part is going to come down to your limiter. You want to have, of course you want some headroom when you're mixing. So when you go into the mastering, you should have something to work with. But you could tell like this. Go over, I'm holding command, switching through these, and then I get to peak. Click on that and press play. See that I have minus 15 dB of headroom to work with. So my mastering chain has something to work with. So I'm not even close to clipping yet. And then when I do go through this, throw on my mastering chain, now I have my limiter on. I bring my threshold down to a point where I'm hitting the top peaks of the music. And this is going to be bringing my level up when I put my output ceiling back up, and I leave it at minus 0.2 so I never clip. It gets stopped at minus 0.2. So you can see if I go through my peaks again, I'm going to click on it to restart it and then press play.
Turn around and come to find out that the bum was me too. It all started making sense. How could I steal for myself?
Notice how it just stops at minus 0.2, so I'll never clip. So that's the point of the limiter, is to get your maximum loudness and to make it to where you never clip by having an output ceiling at minus 0.2 to give yourself that little tiny space before hitting 0. The next part of the question, and then mix the vocals to the beat. If you have the tracked out beat, I wouldn't do it separate than the vocals. I would mix them together. The only time I would mix a beat not tracked out is because I didn't have the tracked out beat. So for example, like in this song, I didn't have the tracked out beat. It was just the stereo beat. But if I did have the tracked out beat, I definitely wouldn't be using this stereo one. I'd be using the tracked out beat because you have more control over it. You could pan things around. You could adjust individual volumes of the kick, the bass, the snare, all that stuff. So you have way more control over it. And if you're mixing vocals in, that will come in handy. But yeah, so don't do it separate if you have the option to mix them together. Okay, next question, what levels do you aim for when mixing? Kind of answered that in the last question, but when I undid all of this, go to my peak here, reset it. So about minus 16 is what I'm mixing at, so I leave myself with all that headroom. You can see on the audio tracks and everything. Here's the beat. I'm getting minus 17 on the beat, my vocal, minus 16. So I have plenty of headroom when mixing. I always try to stay either in the green or a little bit coming into the yellow, just so I have plenty of headroom when I get to my mastering stage to be able to work with the dynamics and everything like that. So I guess to answer your question, I like to mix around minus 15 dB. What is another program less expensive than Pro Tools but still does a good job? Well, there's a lot out there. Persona Studio One, Reason, and even if you did go with Pro Tools, they have a monthly payment plan that you could do, and you just pay every month, so it's not too expensive. Should you add a limiter after mixing a song in your master channel after making a beat? Yeah, you should add a limiter to be able to get your maximum loudness, just like the first question. So I'm using a limiter here. Whether you're mixing a beat, a full song, whatever it is, you're going to want to use a limiter to be able to get your level up there so it's competing with all the other music out there. And just so it's loud. You want to be able to be heard. If somebody's going through a bunch of beats and one's really quiet, it's not going to sound as good as the one that's really loud. That's just how our ears perceive stuff. Is the louder it is, the better we think it is. To an extent, you don't want to be clipping or anything, but volume tends to play a role in how we perceive music, which is why the whole loudness wars happen and why songs keep getting louder. So you can only get so loud. So we're pretty much to that peak, at least I would think. All right, I have a question. Mixing the vocal and instrumental, each instrumental and vocals. Okay, so pretty much no, you don't want to mix the instrumental separate than the vocals. So, like you're asking, would you mix the beat in or the instrumental in a one DAW and then send that over to mix the vocals with it in another DAW? No, I wouldn't do that. I would do it all together. You could write a beat in a different DAW. So for example, if I were writing beats, I'd be doing it in Reason or Logic or some other DAW like that I like the instruments, and then I would export it and mix it with my vocals in Pro Tools. That's just my preference, but you could do it all in Pro Tools and everything like that. So as far as mixing goes, I would do it all together in one session. Yeah, the site is working fine. Is it okay to put reverb on your master? You can, but you're going to get a washed out sound and it messes with your kick or your drums. Anything with a big transient, and that's the part I don't like about it. So let's go ahead and show you what that sounds like. I'll put a deverb here, and you don't want to take any gain out if you're doing it on your master. You can put whatever your settings are, it really doesn't matter. I'm just going to leave it as is and then do the mix right here. So you won't have it at 100% because it's just all washed out. All right. So we would have to do it around, let's say, 20% or less.
Love a misfit, this might get a little dark. I advise a parental vision. Close your mind and just start to listen.
Okay, so I'm going to bypass it and then put it on and listen to the drums, because that's what's going to be the difference. You're going to hear that your kicks aren't as punchy. The transients aren't hitting right away. They're more washed out. So here's an example.
Think with your 5 senses. In my mind, I realize that I'm kind of selfish. I give a little, but I often take a lot. Even though I lose often, I'm too cautious for the top, and it's too hard to play the hand I was dealt.
Notice how it kind of like the whole song gets pushed back a bit, and it just isn't as punchy. So that's the thing you lose when adding reverb on your master, is because now your whole beat is running through the reverb as well, and drums, like kicks, tend to not really have reverb on them because they could lose the punchiness to them. So I would avoid reverb on the whole thing if you want your drums to still come through. But if you're okay with a more like washed out sound, then yeah, you could put reverb. There's nothing stopping you. All right. How do you add presence to vocals? Because when I master my songs, the 2 tracks instrumental tends to overshadow the vocals. All right, so that's pretty much like the new tutorial I just released about mixing vocals to a 2-track. It's the same type of problem. I wouldn't overdo the presence in the vocals just because the beat is in the way. I would instead have a nice, normal, bright vocal, but take stuff out of the beat. All right, so for example, this is the session, the song used in that new tutorial, and I go through the mixing process of the vocal, which is a pretty standard vocal, just a nice, bright vocal.
Think that's the realest shit I ever wrote, but will I even...
All right, so that's the vocal, and here's the beat. Now, here's the beat if I don't have my EQ on it. Notice how when I put the EQ back on, it makes it to where it's not as bright. So instead of over brightening the vocals, I'm taking the brightness out of the beat to make room for it. So let's go ahead and listen to those together. Here's without that EQ.
Did I ever wrote? Or will I even live to tell it? Cause deep inside my mind I realize that I'm kinda selfish. See, I give a little but I often take a lot. Even though I lose often, I'm too cautious for the top. And it's too hard to play the hand.
Alright, so notice the difference is now your vocals are coming through and way more noticeable when I EQ'd out the harshness and that instrument that was in the way in the beat. So we'll just listen one more time.
I ever wrote, or will I even live to tell it? Cause deep inside my mind I realize that I'm kinda selfish. See, I give a little but I often take a lot. Even though I lose often, I'm too cautious for the top. And it's too hard to play the hand I was dealt. Instead of blaming myself, I keep a deck of cards.
Alright, so that's what I ended up doing. And just to show you what it is, right here, I'm taking out a lot of information here in the beat. This isn't something you'll do on every single beat, but it is something that worked for this one because the beat was a little bit overly bright anyways. And when I'm mixing, I use reference tracks. When using these reference tracks, mine was way brighter than these ones. So I was able to take out the problem frequencies in the beat, make it sound more like the reference track, and get the vocal to fit into the beat better anyways. So it all works out like that. So that's something you could do, is EQ the beat to make room for your vocals so you're not making your vocals too harsh sounding. Alright, and to the next one. How can I record and layer and pan vocals for a chorus? I don't know the correct way to record or layer them to sound like a complete chorus, so you hear multiple voices and I guess pitches at the same time. So like harmonies, I'm assuming. Well, for harmonies and everything like that, then you could, if you go, I have a chorus, hook chorus here, and it talks about all kinds of stuff. 5 different songs where we look at the hooks and different things, but let's look at this one here, because this one has the harmonies in there. This song is, let's go over, I believe it's, so right here, I go through each individual one to show you the harmonies, but let's look at the full thing together. It's the stacked on the choir hook here.
Don't give up on me, don't give up on our dreams, don't give up, don't give in. Don't give up on us, please.
Alright, so what I was doing is there's one here that I pan to the right, I pan this to the left, a little bit to the right on this one. So this one's further right, left, further left, center. I'm just doing all of that, and on each individual one he has a normal what he originally sang it at, that pitch for a couple of them, and then this one's a lower pitched one, and then this one's more of a high pitch, and then this one's more of like an in between. So he's getting his harmonies in the sense, like say he's singing an A for these ones here, and if he's in the key of A minor and he wants to sing a fifth, then you just count up A, B, C, D, E. So there you go. E is your fifth, and that means you're singing a fifth interval with your root, which is A. So you could do that. You could do a minor third. So A, B, C. So C is your minor third. And you could sing a harmony or an octave. A, go up an entire octave to A, and you can sing that either, if you could reach it, cool. If not, maybe do a falsetto. So stuff like that. If you're doing singing parts, that's how you could get a bigger chorus sound and pan it around, and you can make it sound nice like that. But let's also show you, if you don't really have harmonies, you just have layers. Here's, in this session, the first layer.
How could I be so dumb? How could I be so dumb that I got no?
That's just center, right? Now let's throw in the left.
Where to run, and I'm lonely, should've stayed inside. Mama told me, but I didn't listen.
And now let's throw in the right.
How could I be so dumb? How could I be so dumb now?
And then throw in a second center to really make it fuller.
I got nowhere to run, and I'm lonely.
And then he has some emphasis on the center.
Should've stayed inside. Mama told me, but I didn't listen.
All right, so see how it sounds really full and wide and everything like that? If I didn't have those sides in there, it would just sound in the center.
How could I be so dumb that I got nowhere to run?
It still sounds fine, but it's just not as wide.
And I'm lonely.
Or if you want to emphasize the width, you could take out some of the center.
Stayed inside. Mama told me, but I didn't listen.
So it's all about how you organize it. Just record in several layers. Don't duplicate them. Some people make that mistake of duplicating tracks. So you don't want to just go over here and duplicate. Because if you have a duplicate track and you try panning them left and right, now if it's stereo, it'll sound one left and one right. So for example, here is the original stereo one.
How could I be so dumb?
But if you duplicate it and pan it left and right, then listen what happens.
How could I be so dumb?
See how it's in the center? So that's a duplicate. It will never sound left and right. It sums it to the center. So make sure you're recording in your layers. Don't just duplicate them because that's not going to work out. Okay, question 2. I know a short delay range gives you that Haas effect. How can I use delay to manipulate a stereo field in multiple ways? Well, there's several ways to do it. You could send it out on an aux and get a sense of space using a delay in that Haas zone. You could duplicate a track and move it. So, for example, like how I duplicated that track earlier, and I was saying don't do it, just record it in. You could mess with something like this to get a sound, stereo sound. So here's an example. I'm going to go here. Here's our vocal. Let's just take this, and what we're going to do is delay it a little bit. So I would just nudge it over. And now let's listen, one pan left, one pan right.
How could I be so dumb?
See how it sounds stereo, even though it's technically not, because if I were to put that back,
how could I be so dumb?
Now it sounds mono again. So that's messing with delay and being able to use it to create a sense of width to a sound. And you could delay it a little bit less, a little bit more, but once you get to a certain point, you're going to eventually be running into some problems. So that's if I do it too much.
How could I be so dumb?
Hear that? Now you're having a phase issue. So you don't want to cancel out frequencies or anything like that, or reinforce too many frequencies. So that's something where you're delaying too much. So you have to try to stay into a small zone where you're getting a nice stereo width without having the cancellation of frequencies. So another thing that you could do, let me get rid of this, is create a sense of space using that delay, that same type of process. So I'm going to go with an aux input here, throw on a delay unit. Let's go with mod delay 3, and let me get my vocal set up to go to this delay. I'll solo out my vocal, and let's bypass this first.
Think that's the realest shit I ever wrote.
Notice how it's dry right in the center. You could use the short delay times to manipulate the sense of space without using a reverb. So let me throw a little bit of feedback on here. Put some filtering on. This first section here, I'm going to go with, let's say, 45 milliseconds. My second one, I'm going to have it a little bit different, and I'm going to keep it within a 20 millisecond space. So I'll do 57. So that's a 12 millisecond difference between left and right. So let's give this a listen. Here's without it, and then I'll turn it on. Okay, so I just made my input delay, so now I could actually get the signal in here. Here's before, and then I'll turn it on for after.
Think that's the realest shit I ever wrote. But will I even live to tell it? Cause deep inside my mind I realize that I'm kinda selfish. See, I give a little, but I often take a lot. Even though I lose often, I'm too cautious for the time.
Hear that sense of space? So even without using reverb, it sounds like a short-tailed reverb without that washed out sound. So you can use delay to create a sense of space on a vocal instead of reverb, which could be beneficial, especially in hip hop, to have more of an upfront sounding vocal with a sense of space at the same time. And if you mess with it, you could hear how far your delays could go without it sounding weird. So let's go past that 20 milliseconds and you'll start noticing a time difference between left and right. It'll sound more like a ping pong delay.
Think that's the realest shit I ever wrote. But will I even live to tell it? Cause deep inside my mind I realize that I'm kinda selfish. See, I give a little, but I often take a lot. Even though I lose often, I'm too cautious for the time.
All right, so notice how as I raise it, you start noticing the delay. It's going back and forth. So it's just about how you set this up. And if I go, let's say I start too high, even if it's in that small zone, let's go to 12.
And it's too hard to play the hand I was dealt.
My original delay is too long, so now I'm having 207 milliseconds until my delay kicks in.
Think that's the realest shit I ever wrote. But will I even...
So it's really noticeable. So if you want that like arena sound, you could have that delayed signal to get something like, oh, he's speaking in a stadium or something like that. And the further this is, the bigger the stadium sounds. But if you want something smaller, let's say we do like 12 milliseconds here and 20 milliseconds here.
Live to tell it. Cause deep inside my mind I realize that I'm kinda selfish. See, I give a little, but I often take a lot. Even though I lose often, I'm too cautious.
So notice it's a little bit harder to hear with the really fast delay time. So around the like 40 milliseconds to 50 milliseconds or so, and having less than 20 milliseconds between the two is a good way to get a nice sense of space in your whatever it is. It could be an instrument, a vocal, but that's a cool way to use delay as a sense of space. Number 3, I understand compression, but what exactly am I looking for with the attack and release on a vocal? I want to be able to bring out the plosives more so they don't sound dead in context. Like I usually can't hear the difference between a B and the next vowel. Okay. Plosives in the sense of like an actual plosive in a mic. So if I were to take away my screen right here in front of my mic and I have a B or a P, then I will get a plosive, which is an excess of air going into my microphone causing kind of like an overage. I don't really want plosives in that sense, but if you're just talking about you want the transients of your B's and your P's and stuff like that to still come out a little bit, then what I would do is back off your attack time. So on your vocal, let's throw this compressor on here. And let me take all this other stuff off. All right, so my attack time here is at 8 milliseconds because I want some time for my initial transients to come in, whether it's a B, a P, or no matter what the word is, then I'm giving it some time to get in there. So if you notice, I'll press play, you'll be able to hear the transients coming through, but if I wanted to crush them more, then I would bring my attack times quicker.
Even though I lose often, I'm too cautious for the top, and it's too hard to play the hand I was dealt.
Hear how it still breathes? It has those still some dynamics to it compared to if I crush it.
Even though I lose often, I'm too cautious for the top, and it's too hard to play the hand I was dealt.
That takes a lot of those peaks down further, and you could just see it on the attenuation.
Even though I lose often, I'm too cautious for the top, and it's too hard to play the...
So I'm hitting over 6, but if I bring it back to 8 milliseconds or so.
Even though I lose often, I'm too cautious for the top, and it's too hard to play the.
Notice how my highest peak is barely hitting 6. When it was a faster attack, I was almost at 12 for that highest peak. So it's all about your attack time determines how much is being taken out and how quick. What part of the word are you hitting? The very first part when the transient hits, then you're going to have a fast attack time to hit that very first part. Or are you letting the very initial transient come through, but then you start compressing after that? That's your attack time. When do you start compressing? And the way you're saying it, you want your Bs, your Ps to come through more, then back your attack time off so those come through more. And then you could have your release set so it compresses the vocal and it kind of rhythmically goes with it. So look at my release here.
Even though I lose often, I'm too cautious for the top, and it's too hard to play the hand I was dealt. Even though I
see how it kind of flows with it on the attenuation here, and it just sounds like it's going with it. If my release is too fast, then I'm only compressing a tiny piece of the vocal. If my release is too long, then I'm compressing it so long it doesn't really have time to recover to start the compression all over again. So I'm finding a middle zone where the attack tells me when the compressor starts, so a little bit after the initial transient, and then my release tells me when to let go of the compression to start all over again. So you just want to have it to where it's hitting the parts that you want. So I'm able to compress everything except the initial transient on my settings right here. Wave Center plugin, I can see it on the instrumental track. How do you use it? What is it for? Yes, so this is the session for that new tutorial, mixing a 2-track to a vocal to a 2-track, and I'm using center on it. You can see here, all I do is add a little bit of side information, is just to make the beat sound like it surrounds a little bit more. I do have a free tutorial on YouTube that already shows me using this, of giving side information, so you can check that out if you would like. I'll put a link to it in your comment. And that's this video here, which shows you how to use it. It just adds a little bit of side information, but go ahead and watch that free one to get an idea. How to mix a fully tracked out beat in Studio One with stock plugins. That is like a full-on tutorial. I will not be able to fit that into this video, but I use Pro Tools for my mixing most of the time. I do have Studio One tutorials on mixing with stock plugins, but I don't have the fully tracked out beat for that one yet. That's only in Pro Tools at the moment, so that is an idea for a future tutorial. I know you've done mixing rap vocals in the past, both stock and not, but I'm still wondering what are some great inexpensive plugins for mixing rap vocals or vocals in general, like maybe the top 5 that you can use to get a professional sound while not emptying the bank. Some free ones you can check out are by Slate Digital, and you can see here the Revival plugin and the Monster Dynamic Processor. Those are both free. They give a cool sound. I used it for parallel compression. There's EQs and stuff that I use from Waves. They usually have it on sale for like $39 or something like that. So if you want, you can use that. But the EQ that is stock is perfectly fine. It works just the same. I just got used to using this one. And reverbs, deverb is good, so the stock one's good. Delays, mod delay is good. The de-esser, you could use the stock or this Waves one, which isn't expensive either. So pretty much the stock ones are perfectly fine, but if you want to replace them with paid versions, then Waves has some fairly cheap packs that you could get. You could get like a gold bundle for like $200, and it comes with a bunch of plugins. But as far as plugins outside of what the stock ones could do, then there's plugins like this Deverb, which is something that reduces reverb in a recording. You could check that out at Plugin Alliance. It's pretty cool. It's not a perfect fix for things. You're always better just getting a good recording that doesn't have a bunch of room sound in it, but this can help tighten it up a little bit more. A linear phase EQ. This is a Waves plugin. Because Pro Tools doesn't have a linear phase EQ, so they just have a the regular EQ. So if you want a linear phase EQ, go ahead and grab one of those over at Waves for a fairly decent price. Center, this one's not very cheap, but if you wanted to raise up some side information, then waves.com. I like the UAD plugins. They're not cheap or anything like that, so that's not really something you were looking for. But I like how those sound. And I like the Waves limiters, the L3LL multi-maximizer. I could do the limiting here, and I could adjust the individual bands here. So that's a really cool thing. But overall, the stock are perfectly fine. Waves plugins tend to be the cheaper way to go because they have a lot of sales all the time. But it's just up to you on where you want to go to get your plugins. And the number one thing is just know that it's not always the gear or the plugins. It's more the techniques you use to get the sound. So start off by trying to master your stock plugins. And then once you feel like you're getting limited, that's when you go and buy the next. So I want to know what plugins you use to get clear vocals. Like I listen to radio and hear the clearest vocals. How can I get that? Well, I like to think I get pretty clear vocals in my mixing process, but just the basics of the very first thing I always do with a vocal, or the 3 steps that I feel like you have to do with a vocal, are deal with the problems. So if you have sibilants, you need a de-esser. So you would use a de-esser to take out the sibilants. That makes it cleaned. You clean up that harshness to it. And then an EQ. So here's an EQ. I'm filtering out low end. I'm fixing the problems in the lower end here. The body of the vocal had some issues right here. I had a little bit of a nasally sound going on, so I brought that out. So you clean it up a lot with EQ. EQ is your biggest friend when it comes to cleaning up a vocal. And then compression is to make it to where it's dynamic. The dynamics are controlled. You don't want stuff popping in or out of the mix. So those are the 3 steps I use for a clean, clear vocal. And while you mix, use reference tracks. So for example, in this one, when I was mixing this vocal, I was comparing it to a J. Cole song and a Kendrick Lamar song. So you could really compare as you go throughout the mixing process. And if theirs are brighter, then add more brightness to yours. If theirs are thinner, then thin your vocals out. So just use a reference song, and the plugins are just basic EQ, compression, de-esser, stuff like that. How to make a clean song like on the radio, and echo effect. Alright, so I already have the video here, getting ready for radio, creative censoring techniques. This is like cutting vocals out, doing the delays, everything like that. So here is the link for that one. How to export a session into MP3 format without the audio losing its quality. When you're exporting a session down to an MP3 format, you are always compressing the signal. There's no way around it. That's what an MP3 is. It's a compressed format where they take out certain frequency bands where it's not really noticeable to the ear. They figured out a way to take out certain frequencies that you can't really notice. So the best thing to do is export as the highest quality MP3 as you can. So if I'm bouncing to disk and I want an MP3 here, I want to do MP3 44.1, and this is going to be the highest MP3 that I could do. So I don't want to do a low quality MP3 or anything like that. So don't be lessening your stuff over here. Pretty much if you have the options to do 320, then do 320. Don't do 128 or anything like that, but do the highest quality MP3 you can, and that's the best way you could do it. But no matter what, going from WAV to MP3, you are compressing it. That's why it's a smaller file size, so there is no way around the loss in quality. But it's not supposed to be that noticeable, and so just go with the higher quality one. How much money do you need to build a studio? What's your experience? I built it very slowly over a long period of time, so it was a lot easier to do it that way. I started off with a DAW, so I think I had like Sonar way back when I first started, and then ended up getting Pro Tools later on with my student discount because I was in college at the time. And then from there, I got an interface so I could record, which was used from Guitar Center for like $200. And then I got a microphone, which was like $100 at the time, and it was a terrible mic. It was a MXL condenser mic, which sounded terrible. And yeah, so I just did it over time. I'm thinking I probably, just to get started, spent like $1,500 if you include the acoustic treatment and all the cables and an external hard drive and the computer and all of that stuff. Actually, the computer was $1,100 because I like Mac for computers. But yeah, if you include the computer, maybe like $2,500 or so to really get started and get everything. So you could spend much more than that if you want higher end gear, which I've upgraded over the years. So now I have a new interface, I have new monitors, I have new computer, I have a lot of new stuff. So just go with it as you can, but I'd say about $2,500 to get started. How can I mix my drums and get a clean sound with 808s, kicks, and bassline plus hard-hitting snares? It starts out with, what does your original sample sound like? If your kick drum or your 808 is lacking in the original use, then you can't really do much. You can't enhance something that's not there. But if it is there and you're just trying to mess with it, then let's look at one of my courses here. So I have write, mix, master, and copyright a beat. Let's look at the mixing bass and kick. All right, so right here, let me make it larger. I have a boost right here because I'm emphasizing a certain part in the bass. I'm leaving room for the kick down here, so I'm emphasizing right here at, 174 hertz, and then dipping out on the body of it because I just want this part to be emphasized. The whole point is to make room for your next section. This is the kick EQ, giving a boost on the low end and a boost on the high end. This is the snap of the kick that was coming through. This is more of the punch of the kick that was coming through. I did some parallel compression on the kick, and this makes it to where it's more punchy. And then on my parallel compressed signal, I did a really big boost because this is something that was blended in at a lower level. So low end, high end for the parallel compression on the kick. So those are what I would do for mixing bass and kick with the low end. For the snare, I like to use a plugin. So this plugin right here is really good for getting that nice punchy or nice thick snare. I usually go about 100 hertz and I boost it from there. You could use any EQ you want. You could just go with like a standard EQ like this, go around 100 hertz or so, and that's a little bit of like body on the snare. Or you can emphasize the higher end of the snare. It's really up to you on how you do it. You could compress a snare to get the body louder and the original snap more even with that. So if you just want an overall larger snare, then do a slower attack on it, and it'll bring up the body and not affect the original snap of the snare. So that's something you could do. Do you mix down yourself or do you have students do it for you? Well, how you spell it is Shaun. So a lot of people spell it wrong, but it's all good. I don't have anybody else do anything for me as far as mixing. I do all of my own mixing. Hey bro, on the Waves Doubler plugin, does it make sense to sync the delays for the left and right to create width on a vocal? Well, if you sync the delays right here, then you're going to be having it wouldn't be a delay. They'd just both be at the same time. So you would have to have some type of separation, and for width, I guess you would want to go in that zone of less than 20 milliseconds or so in between the two, just to have that width sound instead of a delayed sound. So for example, 8 and 12.
Get without the shame, it's just a part of the game. Hey.
So that's a wide sound compared to
What you must
if I turn these up.
maintain. And I'll admit, I'm probably wrong for taking this shit.
so that you could hear a real large delay.
Again, he was asleep. To him, it never exists.
So just try to keep them closer together. And if you have the direct signal in there as well,
to walk into the store,
then it starts sounding really odd and spacey. So I don't really like using doubler for width on a vocal. And if you really want just a doubled up left, right, center type sound, I would record in 3 copies and get that big wide sound. What is the essential effects to get a fat, good quality track while mastering? Like, what else is required except EQ, compression, and a limiter? How to use them in a way. All right. So outside of my compressor, my EQ, and my limiter, I'm using 2 tape emulators. I like the J37. I use this on a lot of things. It just adds a little bit more presence on the kick and the or in the center area. So a lot of drums and vocals are in the center. So that's where I noticed the emphasis. And then I also recently, about a month or two, no, maybe a couple months ago, this UAD plugin called Oxide just gives you a huge fat sound. So let's take a listen.
Morning, most people usually snoring. I was chilling on my porch drinking a brew, not important. I kinda had a long day. I just got through with recording. Felt like a good idea for me to walk to the store.
So what it is a tape emulator mixed with EQ, all this other stuff. So it just gives it a really nice sound. So I've noticed that this has really improved my mastering chain a lot. So I really like this tape emulator. But just trying out something that adds some type of quality, like a tape emulator or some type of saturation or something on your master, could give it a nice fat quality. But definitely for that fat sound, the Oxide plugin gives you the low end to make it fat. How do you get paid as a producer? So like a producer as in somebody who sits through a session and actually produces it, or a beat maker, so someone who writes beats. Either way, it's a service or it's a product that you're selling. So if you're a beat maker, you're writing beats and you could sell them on other people's websites like SoundClick or whatever, or you could host them on your own site and sell them like that. You could sell leases, you could sell exclusives, you could do anything like that. Best thing to do is just look at somebody who's already doing what you want and figure out how they're getting paid for it, and then try to emulate the same thing. Is it possible to quit your job and do this full time? Yes, I quit my job in 2013 when I was working for Fender, and I was in the warehouse. I got sick of it and decided I wanted to do recording, mixing, and mastering full time. So I quit my job and started doing that, recording out of my studio in my house, and then turned into a mix of that and teaching tutorials and stuff online. So yeah, you could definitely do it full time. There are no tutorials anywhere on how to mix melodies, pads, synths on a record. How do you keep them warm, not boxy and wide? I think that is mostly because a lot of melodies, pads, synths, they all sound very unique. So there's not like a go-to pad that everyone uses. Like with vocals pretty much sound or have similar qualities. So you could take out the same low end, you could take out nasally sections. Like they're pretty, they're all pretty much the same. Like a melody, it could be something that's high pitched, low pitched, in the center, all over the place. That's probably why you don't see a lot of tutorials focused just on that, because they're so different in between each one. But just the basic idea of mixing anything to keep it warm, not boxy, and have it wide is the same techniques I used on the vocal, using like the Real ADT plugin to get a wide sound, or using a delay for space to get a sense of space on your instrument or your synth or your pad or whatever it is. Warm, you could use a de-esser on a something. Like if you have something that's really harsh on the high end but you like it everywhere else, then throw a de-esser on it, because then you're just compressing the high end. So it just depends on what you're working with. They're so different that it's hard to do a tutorial on just that. How do you make money as a producer? Again, same thing. Just you could sell beats, you could sell stuff like that. You could write custom stuff in the studio for people. Just look at people who sell who are producers, and then see how they make money and then follow them. Because I do more of the mixing, mastering, and the tutorials, so I don't really write beats. I haven't for a while now. How do you do mastering? Well, here's my mastering chain: compression, tape emulation, EQ, tape emulation, a limiter. So that is my mastering chain, at least currently. I do change it up every now and then. How do you make sound great a voiceover? How do you make a great sounding voiceover? Maybe. I have recorded voiceover work for somebody, and it's just same type of stuff as when you're mixing and recording a vocal for a song. You just want to get a nice clean vocal, so make sure they're staying 8 to 12 inches away from the mic. Just stuff I show you in my recording tutorials and stuff. And then when you go into mixing it, make sure it's not too harsh, so use a de-esser, clean it up with an EQ, and then compress it. Most likely you don't need reverb on your voiceover work unless it's required, but just a nice, clean, dry vocal is a good way to get a voiceover. Why is Pro Tools so popular? It's just been considered the industry standard, like way back, so everyone's been using it since then, and it helps because people could send sessions back and forth to people. So in school, they tend to teach you on Pro Tools. So when you're working with another studio or you're working with an artist, you could send the sessions back and forth instead of having to track out the audio and do all that type of stuff. So it just makes it easier when everyone uses the same system. But now Pro Tools it's still popular, but so is PreSonus Studio One and Reason and stuff like that. So there's a lot of other DAWs that are becoming the favorites for people. Can Pro Tools do what you do in your other DAW you use? Put all your finished mixed songs in one session and do the final master to skip songs so it's not one big line. It's different because in the one you're referring to is when I take all of my mixes and put it into PreSonus Studio One to master the whole album. You can just use Pro Tools to master an album, but you would export them individually. So say this is one track that I mastered, here's the next track that I mastered. I would have to solo it and then bounce down to disk, and then next one solo, bounce down to disk. Compared to PreSonus Studio One, I could input metadata. I could export them all at one time as a full album. I could create all kinds of stuff. So PreSonus Studio One is definitely better in the sense of mastering an entire album, putting in metadata, putting in images on the MP3 files, stuff like that. How to get better vocal recordings from the start. Thanks. All right, cool. Thank you. And I would say watch my tutorial on recording vocals. So check that out, and it'll get you started on a better vocal recording. How do you get your vocals clean but also fatter? Mine have sounded more thin through the years. I would say if they are thin while you're recording, not like say they're thin before you even start mixing, then maybe it's your microphone, because they shouldn't sound super thin before you even start the mix. So here's what I'm starting with.
Red spent some change with the hope that the world would change. He dropped some cash in a bucket.
So notice how it has a lot of low end in there.
Started on a Sunday. Well, actually a Monday at 2 in the morning. Most people usually snoring.
And then after mixing,
I was chilling on my porch drinking a brew, not important.
so I do tend to thin out vocals a little bit, but then you could use parallel compression to kind of fatten it up a little bit more. But overall, if you're going to have a thin vocal from the start, then there's nothing you could really do. If it's not there, you can't add it. How much for you to build the acoustic panels? So in my acoustic panel video, I think, let's look it up real quick. So I bought my stuff from Lowe's, and the wood was like $2 and something for an 8-foot So you would need at least 2 of those. So let's say $5 for the wood to do one. And then Safe and Sound insulation, which is this one, the 16-inch. Let's see how much it is. $44 for a 12-pack of this. And they don't sell it individually, so you have to buy a 12-pack. So $44 just to make one, you still have to buy that. Plus the $5 for the wood to make the one. So you're looking at $50 right there, plus the screws and the materials. So I'd say just to make your very first one, you need to at least put in like $75-80. And then it will get cheaper per panel if you make more. So if you have 12 installations in this one pack, then you could make 12 panels. You'll have to buy more wood, but you already bought the 12 insulation panels. When you buy the screws, it comes in a pack of screws. When you buy the material, it's cheaper most of the time when you buy in larger sections. So stuff like that. It just depends, but I'd say about $80 to get started to make at least one, and then just spend a little bit more to make more. All right. Yeah, I don't use Ableton, so I'm not sure. Okay, that is all the questions. Hopefully this helps and clarifies. And thank you guys again for your questions. Thank you guys for sticking around on the YouTube channel. Follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and subscribe to my email list, which you could do on my website. You can go ahead and sign up right here, and you'll get a free course as well. So thank you guys for sticking around, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.